Everybody, welcome, and we appreciate your attendance today for today's informational webinar. If we take a look at the agenda, we're going to cover some pretty important stuff. First, we're going to look at what lead is and why it's a health concern, specifically to children. We're then going to take a look at the EPA's RRP rule and what it takes to be compliant with it. And pretty much with compliance, it starts with getting your firm or your company certified and then finding individuals that are going to be representatives of your company to go through this 8-hour lead renovator training. From there, we'll go into the certified renovator, the responsibilities that they're going to see out there on a job site. And quite frankly, if they don't have their responsibilities down pat, it could lead to the next area here, which is enforcement through the EPA kind of getting involved, and pretty much if the certified renovator doesn't have their responsibilities down, or if that company or the individual, the certification isn't current, that's when we can see some enforcement actions being imposed. From there, we'll get into lead-safe work practices, and the most important part of this RRP rule as far as being on a job site, that's setting up your containment. That'll bring us to prohibited practices, things that you should not do on a job site under this RRP rule, and how you protect your workers, which will bring us to all the records that you have to keep under this RRP rule. And that'll bring us to a quick 15-minute Q&A session with you, the audience. And we ask that you hold your questions till the end when we go through that Q&A session. So let's get right into it. What is lead? Well, lead is a heavy, soft, flexible blue-gray metal, and it actually occurs naturally in the world. And it was mined and turned out to be kind of a happy accident. It's a byproduct of smelting silver. The chemical symbol for lead is Pb, and the Latin, what that symbol stands for in Latin is plumbum. And you can see almost a connection. We're talking, 2,000 plus years ago. To something that we or an occupation that is very familiar with us today. The symbol for lead, Pb, again standing for plumbum, and we can think of plumbers and plumbing and everything else. Well, the reason for that is the first aqueduct, the first kind of plumbing system that we know of in the civilized world. The Romans used to mine 80,000 tons of lead per year to make the various plumbing and the aqueducts and everything else, so they can have a water supply, a water source. Lead is perfect for pipes, right? Being that heavy, soft, flexible, malleable type metal. All right. When it comes down to lead being in our world, nearly all of the lead which we are exposed to is due to human activity. It didn't, obviously just leave off, or with the Romans. We can see, if we go to the next slide, all the various uses that lead as a metal is used for. Well, lead prevents corrosion. It's good for killing mold and mildew. And like we already said, for pipes, it's easy to shape, or it's malleable. It's a very strong metal, very durable. It can also block radiation. And if you've been to the dentist before, and you're getting a dental x-ray, they will put an actual lead kind of blanket over your more sensitive parts, if I can say it like that. It also blocks sound. And then if we get to the last three uses, it ties right into this RRP rule and lead renovation and dealing with lead paint. The reason why lead was used in paint in the first place, it helps paint dry faster. It makes the paint brighter, and ultimately it's a binding kind of material, so it makes the paint more durable. If we go to the next slide, I would like you guys to take a look at something from 1910, and this is an old Dutch boy kind of advertisement for what they called their white lead. And if you look at the kind of tagline for this ad down there, fall in line for good painting with pure white lead. So lead paint was an industry standard, and that's why it's so common now. It was quite literally the best paint you could use. It lasts for decades, quite literally, without kind of peeling or or chalking or flaking or deteriorating. But no matter how strong a substance, or excuse me, a material is, like lead paint, everything will eventually break down. And when lead paint breaks down, it becomes a health hazard, and that's why we see the need for this training and for the awareness. Um, just take a look though at that ad, and you can see the banner that they're holding up. Dutch Boy was absolutely in league, and these older paint companies were in league with the National Lead Company. And that's why it took the Consumer Product Safety Commission in this country up to like 1978 to ban lead-based paint for residential usage. There are some other countries like Australia and England. They banned lead-based paint for residential usage in the late 1800s. So it's kind of, you know, a little bit of history here where we have lobbyists for the paint companies and the National Lead Company, which pretty much held up something that should have happened probably, you know, 70, 80 years ago. Next slide, please. So how, now that we know it's common, and basically it's found in these older homes, if the house is built before 78, it's pretty much it's going to be there, almost a guarantee. It gets right into, you know, what is the need for this training? What's it all about? Well, lead paint and lead itself is very hazardous to kids. Very small doses. I mean, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, they have lowered their level, what they used to call a level of concern, which is now a reference level, to anything above 5 micrograms per deciliter of blood. We're talking about very small trace amounts can cause harm to children. All right, some of the cause, it may cause reading and learning difficulties, speech and language problems, and the reason being is when lead gets into your blood, it pretty much attaches itself to red blood cells, and we know that red blood cells carry oxygen around the body. But besides for that, lead like zaps or takes away other nutrients that the body needs for healthy growth and development, like your calcium, like your potassium, your iron, your zinc. Based on that, I want you to imagine a baby and their their developing brain, their developing heart, their developing lungs, their entire developing body, and the blood that is feeding the growth and development of that new child or that kid is going to be what I call junk blood. It's blood without the kick. It's blood that is oxygen and iron and zinc and potassium and calcium starved blood. That fact alone is why the EPA has acted, and all the statewide Department of Health and HUD and various other government agencies, why they're very big on this lead paint problem. Where the CDC did a national survey out of their Chicago office in 2009, and they discovered over 1 million cases where there were kids with high levels of lead in their blood, which were causing these various issues. I mean, that's obviously a widespread problem in this country, and that's why we see the need for this training. Besides for how it attacks the central nervous system, the brain, and the kid's ability to think and speak, it also it causes physical damage like poor muscle and bone development and coordination problems. Worst case scenarios, and with the 1,700 students I've seen and the 150 plus classes that I've taught, this RRP class alone, I've heard some success stories, and I've heard some, unfortunately, some horror stories. And enough lead in a child's body can cause deafness. They can slip into a coma, and then obviously the ultimate, ending or the worst ending would be it could cause death. And what everyone needs to understand is that once a kid develops speech and language problems or learning difficulties, it's a permanent condition. All right, you don't gain IQ points back once you lose them when a kid gets poisoned by lead. Next slide, please. So now that we know it's such a danger to children, I want to go over the basics of the RRP rule itself. And it really boils down to what they call target housing and child-occupied facilities. All right, renovators must be certified through training if they're working in a pre-1978 home. And that year, it's a key year, and it's based on when the Consumer Product Safety Commission finally acted to ban lead-based paint for residential usage. So the housing that is targeted under this RRP rule from the Environmental Protection Agency. Again, the easy way to remember what target housing is, just remember that phrase, pre-1978. But it doesn't stop there. Your child-occupied facilities. There's a criteria to be met. A child has to be under 6 years of age, and that's really the easy way to kind of remember what constitutes a child-occupied facility. But they have to spend significant time there. And under the EPA's RRP rule, it's 6 hours per week or more, and 60 hours per year or more. And once you have a child, it could be just one 6-year-old or younger child who's in a child-occupied facility like your school or your daycare. Once they're in there for that significant amount of time, this RRP rule kicks in. It's something that the workers, if they're going to do a renovation, repair, or painting type project in that building, they would have to follow this RRP rule and be certified. Next slide, please. To continue with the EPA's RRP rule, it's all about the disturbance of lead-based paint. And this is a big misconception with a lot of the students I see and a lot of the people I speak to when they call in our office and are asking about this course. They say, do you have to, even if you're just going to put up a fresh coat of paint in a bedroom, do you have to have this lead renovator certificate? The answer is you only need the RRP certificate or the lead renovator certificate if you are causing a disturbance. Once you cause a disturbance, and that word disturb carries a lot with it. Did you put a sledgehammer through a wall on a partial demo? Did you put a drill through the wall because you're hanging, I don't know, new cabinets or something? Are you refinishing a floor that had lead paint on it? Anytime that you're causing a disturbance, you're creating lead dust and debris, and we know now, lead contaminated dust is very poisonous, especially to children. In general, it really applies to any occupation, whether you're a property owner, a manager, you're a painter, a plumber, a carpenter, electrician. If you're causing that disturbance, you need to be certified through the EPA as a lead renovator. Next slide, please. So to speak on compliance, the first thing that needs to happen is the company itself has to be certified through the EPA. To become certified, you submit an application and pay a $300 fee directly to the EPA. Now, training providers such as ourselves and the hundreds of training providers across the country, we do not process firm applications. It's between the contractor or that owner of the company and the EPA. Training providers such as ourselves, we have no say or influence on whether or not a company gets their firm certified. In my experience, the only thing that has held that up before is if a company has a lead violation against them to begin with. The EPA is going to want to know about that and what the how severe that violation was before they will give the firm certification to that company. If it's all good and the EPA accepts your application, it's going to be valid for 5 years, and it allows you to perform work in what's called a non-authorized state. There are 13 states in the country that are running their own RRP program, so that leaves 37 states under the EPA's kind of jurisdiction. So once you submit this application, you would be good for those 37 states, and that is information that we could pass on to you after the webinar and everything. We can email you that information. That wouldn't be a problem. Next slide. So the firm has responsibilities, and really when we say firm responsibilities, we're talking about the owner himself or herself. They have to ensure overall compliance with the RRP rule. Okay. Ultimately, if something goes wrong with the project, it will fall on that owner of the company. The firm has to ensure that all renovation personnel are certified renovators, so they either have gone through an 8-hour training or they've been trained on the job by a certified renovator. And we're going to come back to that last statement on the next slide, what it means to be trained on the job by a certified renovator. The company, the firm, has to assign at least one certificate holder to all the projects. And then, of course, there's pre-renovation education requirements and all the record-keeping requirements, which we will discuss in the second to last slide. Next, please. So once the company gets certified, and it has to be said that the company can be certified before the individual takes a class or vice versa. Um, the EPA recognizes that, sometimes when you're trying to find a class in your area, you find one that's 3 or 4 weeks down the road. So it doesn't make any sense to wait for that class to then put in that firm application, because the EPA says, give them at least 90 days to process it. In our experience, it takes them about 30 days to do it, but they, kind of have to give themselves that 90-day window. So it doesn't make any sense to just wait by, submitting that application. You can get on it before taking a class. At any rate, to become a certified renovator, an individual has to take an EPA-approved 8-hour training course from an EPA-accredited training provider such as us, Green Education Services. There is no application that an individual has to put in to the EPA to get certified as an individual. That's the responsibility that the EPA has given the various training providers across the country like us. All right, we issue the certificate. It has a unique ID number on it. We snap the student's picture. It has their, the date they took the course and they passed the exam. All the identifying information will be right on that certificate. Refresher training is required every 5 years. It's basically, half the class. If the initial training is 8 hours, the refresher training is 4. And what it boils down to is, keeping everything current is really the rule of thumb in this industry. So back to what I mentioned on the last slide, how not everybody on a job site needs to sit through the 8-hour course. The last section of the training, Module 8 itself, is all about how a certified renovator passes that knowledge down to the non-certified renovators or the non-certified workers on the job site. It's I always try to convince or advise companies to send at least 2 or 3 people to the training, because you're always going to need a certificate holder for the job site. But at least if you send one person through the training, you are in compliance. Again, Part 8, and it's a pretty important part of the training itself, is how that certified renovator who just sat through the 8-hour class will now take on the role of the instructor. Next slide, please. So the certified renovator has many responsibilities, and if we go through these, he's in a supervisory role, so he's going to perform work. He can work side by side with the non-certified renovators, but he's directing lead safe work practices. He's making sure guys are wearing their respirators. He's making sure that containment is set up properly. Pretty much, all eyes on the certified renovator, so to speak. Again, he provides on-the-job training to the non-certified guys, and I must stress that phrase, on the job. Now, the certified renovator can take his guys to a classroom and provide instruction that way, but the EPA suggests, and so do I, to guys in this industry, they learn by doing. So you can, in essence, kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You can set up for a real job your company's going to make money on, and you can provide this on-the-job training to get your workers up to snuff. A major responsibility of the certified renovator, and only a certificate holder can do this, is use an EPA-recognized test kit or collect paint chip samples for lab analysis to basically identify, is this lead-based paint or not. If it comes back negative, that test, well, then the RRP rule, it pretty much ends there. There's no lead paint disturbance, so you kind of go along business as usual. But once the lead comes back, or the test comes back positive for lead paint, this is when the entire rule kicks in. So what does that mean? The certified renovator has to be physically present while they're posting warning signs, setting up their containment, and ultimately at the end of the job when the final cleanup is happening. So if you think about it, the renovator's there at the key moments. They're there at the beginning to test. They're there during or beforehand to set up containment. They're there during the project, leading the lead safe work practices, and they're of course there at the end doing some clearance testing and cleaning verification. Maintaining the containment even when the certified renovator, now the certified renovator is allowed to leave the job site. A kind of general rule of thumb is to make sure you're at least an hour or 2 away from the job in case the EPA or an inspector shows up. But ultimately, the renovator or the certificate holder doesn't have to be there the entire time. There are a couple states, Massachusetts being one of them, where they do require the certificate holder to be there when any work is being conducted. The 37 EPA states don't make that a requirement. And again, cleaning verification and ultimately preparing and maintaining the required records, it's going to fall on the guy that was there, on the job, boots on the ground, who was, interacting with the client and conducting the tests, training the workers, and what have you. Next slide, please. So what happens if the certified renovator doesn't meet his responsibilities? It gets to this whole thing of enforcement, and the way the training is set up, the first hour is all about the health risks to children, because nobody wants to see another lead-poisoned child. Just think about how that sounds. But if you have a stone in your heart, where your emotions should be, if that doesn't move you, the very next thing that the EPA sets up with this training is all about requirements, regulations, and enforcement. And just look at that number, right? The maximum fine for being non-compliant with this RRP rule is $37,500 for each violation. Those firms who knowingly or willfully violate this regulation may be subject to more fines and imprisonment if they can't get the money from you. You read that and you realize that the EPA is just not, there's nothing humorous about this with them. They're taking it very seriously. And when you go back to the history of it, 1 million kids in this country with high levels of lead in their blood that are going to have a very difficult, chance just interacting socially as they become adults, just because of the limitations imposed upon them because of lead poisoning. You can see the need for this enforcement type action. Next slide. The major part, and this, if this requirement is ignored or done incorrectly, it will carry the maximum fines. Now, the EPA is not going to fine a contractor or a company $37,500 for every infraction. They have a matrix that they use, and that is another document. If you guys request it, we can provide that at the end. For getting Renovate Right pamphlet, that's not going to carry a $37,500 fine. But not setting up containment and taking the chance of having dust and debris escaping into the rest of the home or neighboring properties, they're going to hit you with the maximum fine because of that. So containment, which protects residents and workers and prevents the spread of dust, and of course provides easier cleaning at the end of the job, it's 100% required. And if we go to the next slide, please. Here's a major component of this containment, which is basically treating the job like it's a crime scene. You're going to have your look at the sign, warning, lead work area, and they don't even hide from the word. They put it right on the sign. It's poison. It's exactly what you're creating when you're disturbing lead-based paint out there in the real world. Okay, with the warning signs, with your yellow caution tape that very explicitly says "Do not enter." With your orange cones, you set up a perimeter around that interior. Major part of this RRP rule is containment, and again, it will carry that maximum fine if you don't abide by those regulations. Next slide. So with containment, the kind of the funner part, or more fun, parts of the training is when we get to break everybody into groups, and there are various hands-on activities throughout the day. How to test for lead is the first one. Then we get up to setting up your barrier signs at flapped entry doorways, covering and moving furniture. We get to take our classroom and pretty much turn it into a job site right there, and it's a very effective way to train renovators or to train guys in this industry. They learn by doing. All right. Next slide, please. There are prohibited practices that you'll learn for this training, things that you should no longer do if it is something that a habit or a practice that your company does. But under this RRP rule, open flame burning or torching and heat guns above 1100 degrees Fahrenheit are absolutely prohibited. Reason being, you turn that lead paint into a fume, into a gas, and at that point it can go through the pores of a human being's skin. When it's just dust debris form, If it gets on your hands, it's not going to be small enough to get through the pores of your skin. You just wash your hands, you'll be fine. Once you turn it into a fume or a gas, all bets are off. You almost need a full hazmat suit if you're operating under those conditions. Considering it's so dangerous, the RRP rule and the EPA, they just prohibit it outright. EPA and HUD, they have a motto. Their motto is work wet, work safe, and work clean. And at the very top of that list is working wet. So dry scraping is a big no-no. And those of you that that you've been painting, if you're out there right now, if you've been painting for 10, 20, 30 years, you know the benefits of using like a wet sanding sponge versus a dry one, and how it keeps the dust down and ultimately will keep you, your workers, and your clients safer that way. If you're going to use power tools, you have to have a shroud or containment system equipped with HEPA vacuums attached to those power tools. Some of them can be expensive. I know that there's a way to retrofit some of your HEPA vacuums with the tools, but ultimately you can't just sit there and blindly go with a power sander, sending lead dust, all over the place. So we see the prohibited practice. If we go to the next slide, another important part is protecting yourself and your workers. And if you look at that image, it's what I have to admit, it's my favorite part of teaching the course is when we get to dress everybody up as a painter and they try on the suits. It's usually a humorous part of the day. But at any rate, with the painter's hat, the coveralls that we have in class and we sell in our online store, they come with the hoodie. They're very stylish. You guys will love them. But if any tears or rips happen in the suit, you want to close it up immediately with duct tape. Duct tape, of course, fixes everything. And this is a suit that's not meant to be kept for the next day, and they are disposable suits, and that's why we have them in stock, I believe, for less than $2 a pop. So they can be pretty useful, of course, keeping yourself safe, and then pretty cost effective as well. But as far as protecting your workers and keeping everybody healthy and safe, it's all about good personal hygiene. So washing your face and your hands frequently at the end of each work shift. Some of the horror stories that I've heard, there was a guy that just every day when he came home, he was a painter working in these older homes. He would come home with dust all over his clothes. He would get right into his pickup truck. Imagine the small confined space of a pickup truck. And on the way home, pretty much every day from work, he would pick up his pregnant girlfriend. And little do they know that dust, majority of it had lead in it, and they were breathing it in that confined space. And the story that this guy told me at the end of class was heartbreaking. His daughter was born with emphysema and had various other health and kind of learning issues, and it was all stemmed from the fact that he did not have good personal hygiene as a worker. And I can just imagine the guilt that this guy feels day in and day out. And he's always going to feel that every time, he thinks of his daughter, and how if he was just simply was just a little cleaner at work, he could have avoided this kind of huge issue with his daughter. Next slide, please. So another component after the job is complete, there's pre-stages of the record keeping. It's records you have to keep during the job. There's records you have to keep afterwards. The effective way that we do it as a company, and I'd say about the 7 or 8 instructors that I've trained myself that are still teaching for us. When we get to this section of the training, it's module 7. It's the second to last one. We create a list, and we have the students write it right in the manuals and in the front cover. So it's just something that they can find, and just have easy access to. But we list out this. There's basically 6 documents that are generated from an RRP project, and besides for the containment and having that set up properly and everything, the record keeping is that other essential component. If you don't have your records straight, the EPA can audit you up to 3 years following the completion of a renovation. All right. Our job as a training provider, I consider it like our main function, besides for issuing the certificates, is to help every student that we come across, every company we come across, stay compliant with this law. It makes no sense to kind of go through the training, get the certificate, and then you don't put it into practice, or you don't kind of save the documents proving that you abided by the regulations and the rule itself. So that this is a major component as well. And again, they can audit a company up to 3 years following the completion of a renovation.